This is Chris Ruddy, and I love Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truth Cast. Make sure you're tuning in just like I do every day, every week, every minute.
With breaking news and political commentary from a public servant, serial entrepreneur, community leader, philanthropist, and American patriot, and a darn nice guy. It's time for the Grassroots Truthcast and your host, Gene Valentino.
Hi, friends, Gene Valentino, and welcome to another episode of Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. The election has occurred. The popular vote has spoken. That meant really the Electoral College wasn't as much the issue as we thought it was going to be as a determining factor in the settlement of the election of 2024. Oh no, instead, Donald Trump won the popular vote in all 50 states nationwide. Congratulations goes out to Donald Trump, his team, and his family for withstanding the perils, and they've withstood the test of time. My guest today is Mitch Firestein. Mitch Firestein is an economist. He's an entrepreneur. He's got an interesting operation on Wall Street. He's both a member of both a resident, I should say, citizen of the UK as well as the United States. I had the privilege of meeting him in Manhattan recently. Mitch, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Gene. And great to be here. And I'm excited about that majority win that we got in the election on Tuesday. I was up until 4:30 a.m. watching the speech that he gave after he won. It was magnificent. And this was a broad-based mandate. And let's not confuse things now. There's no possibility that people can say he didn't get a broad-based mandate. I'm a little curious as to the last seat in Wisconsin, which was reported recently, about how the vote count jumped at 3 o'clock in the morning. But be that as it may, the majority of people have spoken. So the people who are coming out to protest right now, I mean, really, this is getting to the point where it's ridiculous. This is the threat to democracy, and this is an insurrection because the people have voted. Not only have they voted, they've given him a mandate. Popular vote, 5 million votes. There you go.
Popular vote, 5 million votes. And Mitch, it is a mandate, and it's surprising because the Electoral College was not triggered to have what I would call a settlement to the issue. Instead, it proved to be nice, but unnecessary. The popular vote has always been what our democracy was based on. The Electoral College was intended to clear up any shady matters, not necessary in this case. Kudos to the Trump team, the Trump campaign operatives, Susie Wiles in particular, who was his chief of staff within the election, now chief of staff in the White House, soon to be. Folks, we're going to take a break. We're going to have a deep dive on economics, both in Europe and domestically, as a consequence of this election Mitch was just referring to, right after this.
I'm excited to announce our Christmas extravaganza is finally here. Get this season's flannel sheets for as low as $59.98. They won't last long, so get them while you can. Our famous My Slippers, they haven't been on sale for over a year. Regularly $119.98, now only $59.98. Our 6-piece towel sets are back in stock with extremely limited quantities, only $29.98. With hundreds of MyPillow products, there's something for everyone on your Christmas list. Bathrobes, duvets, quilts, down comforters, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save on all MyPillow products. For example, flannel sheets for as low as $59.98. Or our 6-piece towel sets, just $29.98. But that's not all. I'm extending our 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st of 2025. Plus, all orders over $75 or more ship absolutely free.
I'm with a gentleman today that was born in Manhattan, for sure, but began working on Wall Street in the 1980s. He maintained deep ties in international banking for over 4 decades, and mainly in the development and creation of new products, where he specialized in derivative products. We'll touch on that. You don't need to get hung up on some of the language, but it's important to know that he was dealing with derivative products, traded them with large institutions and central banks. Interesting topic because it feeds into the reason why we're here today. Mitch Firestein, this is his book, folks. It's called Planet Ponzi: How Politicians and Bankers Stole Your Future, What Happens Next, and How Can You Survive? Ironic that this is coming out. This actually came out about 12 years ago, but it's ironic how the information in it is so apropos today, Mitch. I can't believe how factual you were on so many levels in this book, Planet Pozzi. Before you go into the dive on the book, where can people buy it?
Well, it's on Amazon. I mean, it's pretty easy to get on Amazon. I mean, Random House published it. It's available in most countries around the world. It's been translated into 7 languages, so it's readily available. Amazon is the easiest place to find it.
What caused you to write the book?
Well, I was sitting at ground zero during the credit crisis in London, and I think we were managing one of the first. Our firm was managing one of the biggest special purpose vehicles with the mortgage when the mortgage crisis hit that went bust. So I had a really good idea. I was an insider, and it's the first real insider's perspective of what happened during the credit crisis. And it was an important story to tell. And I tried to get the story out. Nobody wanted to listen. And I was writing articles for the Daily Mail. I had a column in the Daily Mail and several of the other papers in England because I've spent the last basically 25 years in London. And a literary agent approached me and asked me to do a book. And it seemed that he had 11 interested publishers to do it. And I said, sure. And I picked a number out of my head. And he came back to me a week later and said, okay, everybody's interested. And I said, no, I didn't tell you I would do it. I said that was only an indication. So he convinced me to do the book. And, I really wanted to tell the story because I think it's really important. It's historic. Now, there's no conspiracy theory. I use the government's own data and I walk everybody through the reasons behind the crisis: too much debt, too much credit, too much leverage, and why it hasn't gone away. All they've done is kick the can down the road, played pray and delay, and lie and deny. So,
Okay, kicking the can down the road, Mitch, if I may interrupt from time to time, is this a situation now where Donald Trump and all of us are riding some sort of high, and it might be that the can, when he implements sound policies, doesn't get kicked down the road anymore, and then there might be some sobering pain that sets into some of our financial planning going forward?
yeah, I think that it's very appropriate to discuss that right now we've created some of the most grotesque, and this is all the central banks. We need to blame the central banks, and from Alan Greenspan to Ben Bernanke to Janet Yellen and to Jerome Powell. It's groupthink like you wouldn't believe. And what we've got and what we have and the issues that we have going today is they had quantitative easing that pushed rates far too low for far too long. And you've seen the NASDAQ. I don't know if people remember when in 1999 to 2000, we had the dot-com crash, which I predicted before it happened. The market, the NASDAQ dropped from 5,100 intraday down to below 1,000. And it took 20 years. It took 20 years, like 2022, I think, before it got back up to 5,000. And now we're, going to zero in on 20,000. So it got to 5,000 and it's quadrupled in 2 years or 3 years. I mean, and what are we? We're up close to 50% this year. There's no reason for that, except we have massive inflation. And what we're getting, and I've pointed this out to many people, is we have hyperinflation in selected asset classes. Some asset classes are undervalued, some are overvalued. I would argue that a lot of the tech stocks are in one of the biggest bubbles we've ever seen in history. So would I buy the stuff up here? Not at all. I've been scaling down for a while. I mean, this is a bubble.
This is a bubble and it pertains to one niche, or are you talking about a pattern over all sectors in our financial marketplace.
Well, it's an everything bubble that they've created, but there are pockets of opportunity that are undervalued. And with anything, I've always looked to those sectors to invest in when other people are not looking and they're not oversaturated. I think like the property market, commercial real estate in the United States is a disaster right now. I mean, the banks are highly exposed to that stuff. Property markets are in a bubble. Interest rates have to go higher, but they're pushing them lower. And the example of this is if you look at the disconnect between the 10-year bond, which is the rate at which the government borrows, and the stock market and what the Fed has done. The Fed reduced interest rates, as we know, twice. The first time was 50 basis points, which I accurately predicted before they did it when everybody else was saying 25. And I said they're doing it for political reasons. There's no macroeconomic or fundamental reason that they should cut rates. They cut them to try to get their candidate into office. 90% of the Fed has a heavy bias on the Democratic Party, and they direct their policies to move them forward. So they cut it 50 basis points, and the 10-year was trading at 361, I think, at the time, 3.61%, right? So you would think that the bond market, but the bond guys, I'm a bond guy, the bond guys are always smarter than the equities guys generally, and they usually have a better idea as to where the markets are going. So the bond market, the yields went higher. So that means interest rates in the bond market, it was more expensive to borrow money. That went up by close to, I think, 80 basis points. So we were trading, 80 basis points above that until we had the recent cut. And then we saw a little decline. We went up to 440 or 450 on the 10-year. And we've just seen when they cut another 25 basis points this last week, we saw it come down a bit to 430. I don't know where it is right now because I haven't had access to the screens this morning, but it was trading at 430 on Friday. So you would think that if it was 361 and they cut the rates by 75 basis points, that rate would be lower, but it's not. So the bond market's telling us an entirely different story. And I suggest that all the investors pay attention to the bond market and not to this, as Greenspan would have said, irrational exuberance in stocks. I mean, it's crazy, the nosebleed levels of valuations that we're seeing. And NVIDIA is one of the examples. I mean, you're seeing NVIDIA trade at a valuation of $3.6 trillion. I still don't know how they're making money or what their profitability is. And, even Tesla, even Elon Musk's Tesla is now well over $1 trillion market cap, which is, it's a valuation that's higher than the sum of every single car maker.
Yeah, but are we sitting against a culture of a different expectation and a different approach to how we're looking at value? Because, Mitch, if we go back to 1929, the global financial crisis, we definitely had expectations fall through the floor. And it was in that context that things began to, it was a crisis on so many levels. One of the things I find interesting about your track record is that with regard to the .com bust and the subprime crash leading up to the global financial crisis we had in a few years ago, I don't understand if we're going to see another collapse like we did in 1929. Yes or no?
I think we will. I think we'll see a worse collapse, actually. But
Really, that's pretty significant.
Yeah, I think we'll see a catastrophic collapse, and I just hope they're not trying to dump it into Trump's lap and blame him for everything.
Well, time out real quick. Where do you put your money if you see that coming?
Well, you should be posturing and positioning yourself appropriately. There's no one size fits all. But I've been diversifying my investments, and I think everybody, and we're getting a pullback on precious metals. Everybody needs to own precious metals. They're really an integral part. What that is a play on currency. And we can get into discussing how currencies trade and what currency actually is and why different precious metals are going to have value. And we need to get into the conversation on central banks and what's happening with BRICS Plus around the world. That's really important. But, I worked in Japan as I don't know if we discussed this, but I worked in Japan for a couple of years. And I've been doing massive amounts of business in with that country and their banks in Japan since the 1980s. So I'm familiar, and it appears that we are replicating the model that happened in Japan, and their economy's been in a ditch for the last, it's 3 lost decades of no growth. Their stock market peaked at 40,000, then collapsed. So I see a lot of similarities with the massive accumulation of debt and money printing that we have here that's been going on in Japan. And we're following that model. And it's never a good outcome.
Okay, so those are the similarities. I have a difference. The difference is that Japan did not have a Donald Trump. And here you have now a circumstance where the full financial theories are of spending and cutting, bringing Elon Musk in to remove $2 trillion of waste in the budget. By the way, I believe it. And then you're looking at a focus on incentives and downsizing government, not making it larger, but making it smaller, which, by the way, was your big concern in your book, Planet Ponzi, was the size of government's expansion. And so I see a paradigm shift occurring. I see a paradigm shift occurring that did not exist back when Japan was having its issue. The issue was we didn't expect that out of a leader, and or traits of a leader at that time. But we sure have one now, and we sure see him now trying to perpetuate a future after his 4 years where he can hand off to similar thinking for the future and posterity of this nation. One of the concerns I have is that if you're going to talk about the collapse of the economy in this nation, Mitch, what are the remedies? Is it what you want to talk about now? Digital currency, Bitcoin, an alternative to central banks. China and Russia have been looking at alternatives to a central bank system as well. They hate the notion that they've got to work through the World Bank to deal with the United States.
Well, there's a couple things going on. I mean, we can talk about alternative asset classes, which is what I was focused on for the past 15 or 20 years. Now, alternative asset class investing has a great future. Digital currencies give too much control to the government unless they're decentralized. Decentralization is really important and key to that, because as we saw, we were on the brink of tyranny with the last government that we had. We've got a lot of other ancillary issues that are problems, but the debt is the biggest problem.
Well, are you talking about the technology of the last digital currency? That was Samuel Bankman-Fried, and his digital currency. He had control over some of that currency, which is what is the problem with the digital currency world. I'm very familiar with it in my payment processing area. We were writing software code to handle the processing of a Bitcoin transaction and its conversion to cash in the banking system. Quite an involved conversation, an hour of discussion unto itself. But the trust that has to go into the conversion of a Bitcoin transaction to dollars.
Right.
You may not think the central bank system is perfect, and I don't think it is either. But it's if you're going to put something in there to replace it, it better have more trust than the central bank system. And
Right.
therein lies the threat and the legitimacy of your Ponzi scheme book is really, in my opinion, Mitch, the best part of this book is that it focuses on one issue that keeps reverberating through all pages, and that's your ability and my ability to trust the investment, or in the context of your book, trust the scheme.
Right. But people need to understand what they're investing in. And that's what I said when some of my clients, some of the institutional clients and regular clients that were members at my country club came and they said, we want to discuss Bernie Madoff. And I point that out in the book. And they brought his stuff and his formulas. And I said, look, I can't figure it out. Maybe he's a smarter guy than me, but I have one principle and I repeat it in the book. Don't trust anything in the book. Refer to my endnotes, which are government data. And if you don't understand an investment, don't ever invest in it. And as far as Sam Bankman-Fried, I mean, who is based in Albany down in Nassau. I know a lot about that. His stuff was a Ponzi scheme. He was lying to investors about how he was investing the money. He was gambling with other people's money. And his parents were law professors at Stanford or whatever, and big Democratic Party bundlers. So we don't even know if he's going to stay in jail. I mean, it looks like he's going to skate on this. But I think that there are other issues we need to talk about with regard to the massive and out of control debt that the US has. And getting back to Japan, I don't mean to dwell on this, but Japan was the biggest buyer of our debt. And the way that a government funds its budget from day to day is by issuing bonds. And they were the biggest buyer. Now they're in a position where they can't buy anything and they might turn into a forced seller. China is also a seller. And this year we needed to issue $10 trillion in debt. So we're still a net seller of debt because we've got a debt addiction. And the last lot that was in there, Biden and co. believed in this modern monetary theory, which I refer to as magic money tree, which was a very dangerous thing that Bernie Sanders and the entire far left got involved with. That said, if you have a printing press, it doesn't matter how much you print. Central banks are really responsible for where we are. There's QE, quantitative easing, money printing. They say that we stopped that, but they really didn't stop that. And the issue is trust. Can we trust the central banks to do what they say? No, we can't. The media has already proved itself as unworthy. That's one of the pockets of opportunity out there that's undervalued right now, is all the new media and how we can move forward with alternative media, because people are fed up with listening to the same lies. And we saw that with this election. It was a referendum against liars.
Let's get back on the source. I like to discuss the source of the problem. And to me, I'm not anxious to point the finger in other directions, because if I do, I've got four fingers pointing back at me. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to be reminded that we must take responsibility for our own actions and bad actions. Enjoy the benefits of our good decisions, enjoy the perils of our bad decisions. And sometimes we invest inappropriately and prematurely in things without a full study. What bothers me more is that we have turned into a culture, up to Trump, we've turned into a culture of expecting government now to step in to fix it, remedy it, and repair it, to make it right again, when in fact we are guilty. We caused the problem in the first place. We've got, as you said in your book, too much debt, too much credit, and in fact, we've leveraged ourselves way too far. You mentioned Japan before. China thought they had a pretty good deal buying up some of our debt. Where do we start in terms of turning it around?
Well, Elon Musk's philosophy is right, but President Trump needs to surround himself with different people that think out of the box. I mean, 2 trillion, he can cut more than that. I can think of things that we need to cut. We need to look at the endowments of all these woke institutions that are halls of indoctrination rather than education. I mean, Harvard has a $53 billion endowment, and I saw them testify about the anti-Semitism on the campus. Why is that tax-free? And why are they silencing conservative voices? What is there, 90% silencing of conservative voices at Harvard? I mean, and at all these universities, if they want to be biased and pitch ideology rather than education, the ideology of woke and, identity politics, then their endowments, which are hedge funds, should be taxed, because they're making phenomenal profits, and these shouldn't be tax-free investments. And I think
But Mitch, this didn't just happen, and it's not being done every day in a vacuum. Who are the perpetrators of this conspiracy? It goes back decades, and why was it put in place and allowed to exist? The fact that we've noticed it now and recognized the adverse consequences is great. Now we can fix it. But where did this problem start?
Well, I think in central banking. Central banking started in 1913 when the Federal Reserve was given independence to come up. First of all, the Federal Reserve is not a bank. and it's not part of the federal government. It's owned by member banks. I don't know if your people who are watching this understand that. So they don't really care.
Take a minute to explain. That's good.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying that they don't understand that these banks work for the bankers. For example, Janet Yellen, who everybody knows Janet Yellen, she, for years, she said, inflation is contained, inflation is transitory, inflation is contained. We don't have an inflation problem, and kept printing money and kept interest rates too low for too long. What else with Janet Yellen? So none of the policies that she implemented were right. Everything she did was wrong. And when Janet Yellen moved from being the Fed chairman to the head of Biden's treasury, she was paid around $8 million in speaking fees by the big banks, right? So think about that for a minute. She was paid $8 million in speaking fees to the big banks. Now, why would anybody want to listen to her? Really, it's like quid pro quo, because she gave them friendly policies and bailouts that helped them. She also, and her husband, who was one of those 19 Nobel laureates that signed that letter saying how bad Trump's policies would be for the economy, contributed around $200,000 to Biden's campaign and to the Democratic Party. So you have, on one side, you have these people who are political operatives in positions of power that can dictate what happens to the economy with the policies that they implement, and they can cut rates or raise rates depending upon what they want to do to impact an election. So this is a system that's fundamentally broken, and I don't think they need to readjust the Federal Reserve. I think they need to shutter the Federal Reserve. I think it's past its sell-by date. These guys get 12 or 14-year appointments, and they get it wrong all the time. So, why are we paying for this? This is one institution we need to look into. I mean, we can cut the red ink by 50% in Washington and save way more than $2 trillion. And that's what we need to start looking at. We need to think out of the box and say, look, the wasteful spending's got to stop. And you've got these lifetime people who, like Nancy Pelosi. How did she make $500 million? I mean, seriously.
Not on that salary, she didn't.
Right, but all these people, in Congress are allowed to do insider trading, and that's, her fund is always up because she buys ahead of everybody else. And I wrote an article about this, I don't remember, 2013, when it was either MasterCard or Visa, before they went to Congress to get approved. Her committee was doing it, right? She was in charge of the committee. She bought the IPO, right? She made like 5x. I mean, if you did that, you'd be in that jail in Pensacola. I mean, it's a country club jail in Pensacola, but you'd be there.
Well, there's definitely some bad intention here, and Mitch, that drives to a bigger issue, and it's bad behavior. I've said in my podcasts with other guests, and it seems to fall back with you. It's the same issue. It's called bad behavior. It takes on different complexions based on the topic. But I've been talking about a constitutional amendment. We've got 27 amendments in our Constitution now that all deal with rights, entitlements, privileges, protections of those rights. But we don't have any amendments in our Constitution that punish the hell out of you for bad behavior. In fact, if you go to Congress, you'll feel that they've exonerated themselves in certain situations from the threat of being punished.
Absolutely.
Where is the constitutional amendment that says if you work in self-interest for personal gain at the expense of the taxpayer or the citizens at large, that you will be penalized? And I mean a felony, a federal crime that puts you away and penalizes you dollar-wise. If you're going to tell me that Steve Bannon is going to jail because he was trying to protect the rights of his boss and the secrecy of the information he was aware of at his boss's side, the president of the United States, you can't tell me that bad behavior that's more blatant cannot be punished. And this is where I think we need to go. It drives now to your whole issue on central banking and a lot of other antics that are going on to protect the wrongdoing that's going on in and around the financial institutions.
Exactly. You couldn't have said it better than me, but I think if you look in my book, there's a graphic in there, and it's got a chart somewhere, a table of how many bankers were jailed for the biggest financial crisis in history. And I go through it country by country, and the sum is zero. Zero were jailed in any country for the malfeasance. And to speak at that point, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, ex-chairman at the time, said, "You don't need new. We don't in a autopsy of what happened during the Great Financial Crisis." Greenspan on stage said, "We don't need new regulations. There was definitely fraud committed. We need enforcement of existing regulations." That's a direct quote of Alan Greenspan, and I put it in the book for a reason. So Greenspan, the ex-Fed chair, is admitting that the banks committed fraud. You don't need new regulations. We need enforcement of existing regulations. This is the problem. We have a dual justice system that works for one. We don't really have accountability. And, the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, was the one who said that the issue was we're not enforcing existing regulations. And he was the most powerful guy on Wall Street for a really long time. And that's when it all started to unravel under him. What happened with Greenspan is, under Greenspan's tenure, they convinced Larry Summers, who's a cancer that keeps appearing everywhere, from Harvard to the Treasury, convinced Bill Clinton, and Clinton has said recently, I don't know, a couple of years back, that this is one of the biggest regrets he's ever had, was getting rid of Glass-Steagall. And I think I speak about this in the book. So that is the problem, because what happened is the exponential amount of debt that increased, it just skyrocketed when that happened. And that was under Greenspan. And so that's when we started having problems. And Greenspan actually engineered one of the first bailouts in history. So this was moral hazard. This was the problem. You don't have accountability. In capitalism, right? Capitalism, we have a mechanism, and it's called bankruptcy. When people go bankrupt, that's how it's finished. They don't get bailed out. Like, I don't know if you remember, but we had the Resolution Trust back when we had the repo market failures, and all of these savings and loans, those guys were put in jail. And that's what I said we should have done back when the credit crisis happened, but we didn't, because we don't have any accountability. And that's part of the problem. We need to talk about proportionality, and we need to talk about perspective. And I guess we can get.
Yeah, and let's do that after we make a break. And before we break, folks, we're talking with Rich Firestein. What a great book he's written about 12 years ago. And what amazes me most about Mitch is that the issues he brought up 12 years ago in this book, Planet Ponzi, are just as true today, if not more so. He talks about a complete collapse in our economy greater than the stock market in 1929. We're going to talk more about that when we return right after this.
Throughout history, the spirit of patriotism has prevailed. The battles may have changed, but the values remain the same. Today, in 2024, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the call for unity, freedom, and a better future echoes louder than ever. For more than 10 years, Patriot Mobile has been committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream. Because this year is not just any year, it's the most important year since our nation's founding. Choose a wireless carrier that shares your values. Choose Patriot Mobile.
Hi, friends. Welcome back for our second half of our guest today is Mitch Firestein. He's the proud author of Planet Ponzi. Couldn't be prouder to have him on with me. An economist, trades on Wall Street, dual citizen both in Europe, the UK, and in Manhattan. He has moved up the ranks with some very interesting insights on the economy. He has a very truthful projection, a sobering projection on what the future may behold that I'll let him talk about. Thanks for joining me today, Mitch.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Okay, we need to jump into Europe's economy. Get sidebarred a little bit with your relationship with Nigel Farage, and let's let's have a little fun. But let's talk about Europe and its role in the financial environment worldwide. How they've helped the United States, how they've hurt the United States. Take it away.
Well, look, I think the European Union, the whole concept of the European Union was a bad idea. And that's why I helped Nigel with Brexit. We can get into that a little bit later, but wasn't financially beneficial for the United Kingdom. And I ran for Parliament in 2019 in his party. It wasn't financially advantageous for us to stay in the European Union because we would have had to go joint and severally liable with the other 27 member states and pick up their debts. So in other words, if there was a bank failure for their fiscal profligacy, we would have to, on a pro rata basis, since we had the second largest GDP, come in and pay the biggest chunk of the bailout for them. And I said, look, I love my brothers and sisters in the European Union, but I don't want to pick up the tab for Greece, for Spain, for France, or Italy and their bank disasters. We had nothing to do with that. So why should we have to pay tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars for that? It's just not fair.
And but wouldn't they argue back to you in return that the production jobs, their version of the GDP was an enhancement to whatever your proportionality was in the EU financially?
That could be an argument, but the cash flows didn't demonstrate that point. The cash flows were in my favor on that, and I've demonstrated that on numerous occasions. So that
was based on productivity or fraud.
Based upon outgoing GDP numbers and trade figures. All the trade figures going in and out. The flow is going in and out of the European Union from the UK. So, but the debt was a major issue, and the banks are all on the brink in the European Union because the European Union is just turned into, they have so many presidents and vice presidents, you can't even figure out who's who. And but none of them are elected. It's anti-democratic. The whole system is like a Politburo that they've developed. And
isn't it interesting that you can see now that they are very beholden to our new president, Donald Trump, and are automatically, and Trump's not even in office yet. You've got some leaders talking about canceling their oil and gas contracts with Russia's and moving back to the United States and as soon as we're able to do so. I find that very patronizing and disingenuous, but in fact, it's where we're going to get some of that revenue to pay down our debt.
Well, yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, we should, hopefully, but the problem in Germany, and I've predicted this for a while, I said Olaf Scholz doesn't belong in power and he'll be gone. I mean, he'll be gone before, I think, January from power because he's just, the problem with Germany is they're in a deep recession because they're no longer getting cheap natural gas from Russia that they were getting in the Nord Stream pipelines. When that blew up, it crushed the largest economy in the EU, which is Germany, the powerhouse, the engine that drives the EU. So they don't have any way back from that. So all the German corporations are screaming, we need back our cheap gas so we can drive everything again in this country. And unless we get that, there's a problem. We don't want open borders either. And that's one thing that Merkel started, were open borders in Germany. And it's turned into a disaster for the country. That's why AfD is a party that's gone from 2% up to one of the largest parties in Germany now. And the government, this is the way the media comes into all of this. Now that the media is saying, oh, they're far right. Everybody the media disagrees with is far right or a Nazi or whatever. If they disagree with your perspective, you're not allowed to have that perspective. The problem with the EU that I think we need to chat about is the disproportionality. Like a country like Latvia, their GDP is $43 billion. They have got a population of 1.8 million people, and they have the same vote as like the United States would in NATO. So, they get one vote, or they get one vote with all the other big countries. You get one vote. So that's ridiculous. You have, and these countries are so corrupt, the small little countries, the member states in the European Union, that it's pretty ridiculous.
Well, then what's your take on Ukraine coming into the EU?
Impossible. Won't happen.
Reason?
Ukraine will not join the European Union. It will not ever join the European Union, because that will trigger World War III with Russia.
Does it would I would think it would have been triggered whether they were in the EU or not. I mean, we look at the monies we were on the giving them, and where this has gone. Why would their presence in the EU likely trigger war?
Well, no, it would. I don't think World War III has been triggered yet. And I'll get back to Ukraine would entry. These were the conditions that could have stopped and prevented the war, that were part of a negotiation that would have happened in March of 2022 that Boris Johnson scuppered in Turkey, the peace agreement. The agreement would have been Ukraine won't join NATO, promise that they won't have nuclear weapons, and then we can talk about Donbass and Crimea and the other parts of territory. And
Okay.
that's what really triggered this. What would trigger that is Putin set up a series of red lines. He set up a series of red lines that would impede the security of his country, and he said that could elicit a nuclear response. And we don't want to escalate. We want to de-escalate. We should have, in March 2022, settled this. I mean, because Ukraine has lost this war. They've lost 500,000 people. And I would say close to $1 trillion in GDP and money has disappeared down some rabbit hole or into politicians' pockets. It's an unnecessary war. Money was wasted. 500,000 Ukrainians are dead, and the mass population's been displaced. They can't win the war. It's already over. Even before Trump gets into office, it will be finished, in my view. Because
Well, and he's talked exactly about that as well. He's talked about had he been in office, this would not have ever occurred in the first place.
Right.
Let's stay on your book as it pertains to the economy, the central banks, and Europe. So what do you foresee the future of the EU as it relates to financial, if nothing else?
Well, look, I think the EU will blow itself up, because I don't think there's enough consensus, and I think people are tired of being bullied, which is what Ursula von der Leyen, who's the president, who is reelected, and there's a big scandal with her and Pfizer coming out that she suppressed. But nobody votes for these people, and they're fed up with them dictating policies. I mean, Hungary was the first one, and they tried to cut off his funding from the European Union. And Orban is a strong leader. He's a good leader, and he's a conservative. And they don't want conservative voices. They don't want you to say anything. They want you to sit down and do what you're told. And they elect in the back room. They make some sleazy deals. You have like Joseph Borrell from his socialist from a country that doesn't do anything, and they appoint people from tiny countries where it cost almost nothing to buy them. And it's just a system of corruption. What I think will happen is I think there'll be a massive exit of other countries from the EU. France may leave, Germany may leave. If Germany's economy doesn't turn around, they're leaving the EU, because they're not going to shoulder the debt of all these other countries when we have a crisis. When we have a crisis and Germany has to pay joint and severally liable, they're going to say, we're out, bye.
And all I hear echoing in the background is Donald Trump was right. They never paid their shares towards the whole, and the select few were gaining at the expense of the many. Let's shift our attention to the media. We have, I hate to leave the EU, because I think it really sets a standard as to what's going to happen globally, and we didn't talk China and Russia in the context of EU, but I think China and Russia are set back as well if in fact the EU drops, because more of the EU players will be looking individually again to do deals with the United States as they once had. And that's where a lot of our wealth and prosperity came from. But this, I think you've called it the Cabal of Oligarchs,
right,
in Silicon Valley. This, I think of three in particular, and you can relate it to the your book, Planet Ponzi, this Ponzi scheme. But you have Soros at the top of the pyramid, a close second at his side, Zuckerberg, a close second at his side, Bill Gates, uh, 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 Jeff. There's a bunch of more. Apple's head, Amazon's head. We're looking at a cabal of about 6 to 10 people that have gone out of their way to promote a Democrat Party cause, and they got caught with their pants down. They see they've made a great mistake. Some come back these last few weeks with an olive branch, trying to play nice with the Republicans. Hopefully, the Republicans won't be deceived again. But we need a plan in place to steer the ship away from the media's control. What is that plan from what do you observe? And then what do you suggest?
Okay, well, the media, first of all, is mostly mass censorship, propaganda, and a Marxist twist to it. I mean, people like Bill Gates and Reid Hoffman and Jeff Bezos, all of these guys are pushing an agenda. They don't want people to have freedom. They don't want free speech. They want maximum censorship. I think what we need to do is one of the undervalued asset class is figure out alternative media is picking up quite a bit. But you see, they're trying to legislate in Europe against any alternative media. That's why they've created these big misinformation and disinformation ministries of truth. I mean, you would talk about Orwell would be rolling over in his grave because it's Orwell on steroids, along with you know, the minister of the Third Reich, Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda and enlightenment. This is dark stuff. I mean, you've got some of the biggest funds who are contributing to these organizations. It's not anything I don't like. This is subjective stuff. Okay. Who defines what misinformation is or disinformation? Oh, you hurt my feelings. That's misinformation and you go to jail. And they're putting people in jail in the UK for speech and for mean tweets. Okay. But
that's even worse than what our issues are here on the same point. But it's worse there. You're right.
There's stabbings on the street there, and that goes unpoliced. And these protests go unpoliced with these wild Palestinians burning stuff down. And that stuff people get away with, like BLM and all this other nonsense that happens. And so that's why we have to put everything into perspective and have proportionality, which we don't have. And, the media needs to get reined in. We need new media. People are fed up with it. That's an opportunity. And I'm telling you, I can talk about that for 3 hours, what we could do with the media to revise it. We need government help with that. The Section 230 needs to be redone. I mean, Zuckerberg is a disgrace. He manipulated the last election with his funding. YouTube.
Now, talk about Section 230. I think it's an interesting point. The public ought to hear it.
But yeah, I think. Look, I don't think that these guys now are the public square. So they can't get away with saying that we're new. And I don't know why Congress, unless they're getting money, oh no, that would never happen, right? Unless the congressmen and senators are being paid off to keep them happy. But quite frankly, Google can manipulate with their algorithms. I know this to be 100% fact. They can manipulate any election, anywhere, anytime. And you can't.
Hey, wait a minute. I now have an understanding of how Nancy Pelosi has a $40 million net worth.
Boy. 500 million, not 40.
Oh, excuse me.
She's got a ridiculous net worth, and it's all insider trading.
And she thinks it's okay. I really think the public needs to come out and take their head out of the sand. Folks, it's just as much your problem and mine if we do nothing. Mitch is bringing it up for us. We're talking with Mitch Firestein. He's the author of a great book, Planet Ponzi, but he's also an economist. He also is a institutional investor, broker, not necessarily retail for you and me buying stocks, but he goes out and consults with a lot of the big institutions on trends and patterns and directions and helps them with their financial investment strategy. How's that, Mitch, for a capsulization? Is that good?
I've mostly spent my time in commercial banking and institutional investing. So, institutional investors and central banks have been my forte, and new product development and derivative products. I did the first interest rate swap in North America, and have been actively involved in the global markets my entire career. I'm not just USA centric. So I see the bigger picture. And I think most people need to understand how all these things fit together. And BRICS Plus is really significant, which is what we need to have a quick chat about, because you brought it up yourself. And what we're talking about is going from a unipolar world where the United States dominates everything to multipolarity. And I think that that's where people have a bit of a sticking point. They don't understand that China and Russia and Iran and a couple of these other countries in Latin America, South America, and in the Middle East have been bonding together to come up with an alternative to US dollar-based products. And that's why I think when you talk about what do you need to look for, I think that there'll be an alternative currency that comes out, and I think BRICS Plus will launch it. And I think that it will be a basket of commodities, and I know exactly how they're going to do it. But that's
Okay, on that point, is this consistent with what Donald Trump's been talking about lately in his drive for a crypto environment alternative?
I think that he's right with coming up with an alternative, but I think their alternative is going to be different from that. I have a fairly good idea on what that's going to be and how they're going to do it. But I think you need a tangible asset class to have as a backdrop, because what is a currency? A currency is a promise of a government to repay. So when people realize that you can't repay your debt, it's a promissory note, then your currency becomes worthless, and you become Zimbabwe, or you become this is what happens to your currency right here. Can you see this?
Bring it up a little closer. Oh, yeah. $100 trillion.
It's $100 trillion bill, and that's the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. That's a real $100 trillion bill. I bought a lot of those a long time ago, and now they're worth a lot. I mean, they're not worth anything, but that's what happens to your currency. And I think I have in my book I talk about a $50 billion egg is one of the chapters in my book. But this is one of the dangers you get when you start printing money like that. You get hyperinflation.
That's right.
That's what I was saying. We have hyperinflation in selected asset classes, and I don't think that's far from where we are now.
Well, I got a bill too. This is a $20 bill.
Yeah.
And there's Andrew Jackson. I'm going to give you this bill. And on the back of it, it says, "In God we trust."
Right.
And so up to now, here's the distinction for most people. Economics 101, we believed that the United States government, it used to be backed by gold and silver, as you said, prior to 1971 Nixon administration era. After that, we got off the gold standard, and we simply have a promise from the government that says this is valuable and this is worth. So when I hand you this $20, in your mind, you're saying, I trust it's $20, and I receive it and accept it as $20. And in my mind, I say, I just gave Mitch $20, and it's worth what I gave him. The problem with what's going on, which is why you have a $1 trillion note, is that the government printed too many of these. And as a result, there were too many of them flying around. And the next thing you know, the $20 didn't have a $20 value anymore.
Right.
And so its value to you and me is then arguable between us, because I think it's still worth 20. Oh no, that's only worth 15. I'll ask Gene for 25.
Right. But then what happens is this: when you go into the grocery store, you see it every day. When you look at the prices, and a bag of groceries now is $100. So what it's called is inflation, which is a stealth tax on the consumers who can least afford it. That's why you see this. And I made a big deal about this before the election. I said, are you better? There are two questions everybody needs to ask. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And is the world a safer place now than it was 4 years ago? And the answer to both are why he won the election. And the dishonesty of the media actually augmented my points, because people realize how they're just being lied to all the time, and they're fed up with it. And we're basically at the breaking point here. And these companies, the oligarchs of Silicon Valley, we briefly mentioned Google, YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn, which pulled me off LinkedIn for no reason. One day I had something like 300 or 400,000 followers, and one day I didn't exist. Somebody actually sent me an email and said, you're not on LinkedIn anymore. I said, what do you mean I'm not? And I tried to send them letters, which they ignored. I have no idea what happened. I still don't, but I really don't care. I said, I don't care. I'm on Google. I'm on Google. Just find me on Google. You can find me on Google. It's bigger anyway than LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a far left um, amplification, megaphone for bad ideas. I think you don't really get anything out of it. But the mass censorship has to stop, and we need to put an end to it. And Congress needs to wake up and do their jobs and support the American people instead of being taking cash, stuffing their pockets with it.
Well, I got an idea. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. What if Congress, if they do their job, creates new laws that removes the insulation of the media and these platforms from liability, that makes them liable for that which they publish or don't publish? In this case, allowing allowing the platforms to be sued for pulling you off, for denying you the right to free speech, I think will sober many of the. It'll obviously change the focus of our litigious community and make it work on making sure that facts. You have one big defense: is it true?
Right.
If you're a no good son of a bitch, but I prove that it's true, then you can't sue me for slander because I've just proven it to be so. Now, if I just make reckless commentary that affects you, your family, your business, I'm liable for that, and I should pay the price for that. I think that's where we need to go.
Yeah, I agree. But a big part of the problem is this cancel culture and these snowflakes and identity politics and DEI, which we didn't even get into. I mean, you've got to get back to a colorblind meritocracy where we promote people based upon their ability to do a function. I don't care if you like me or if you don't like me. And that's always been my persona on Wall Street. And everybody knows that. I'm a straight shooter. I tell the truth. And basically, if you don't like that, F off. I really don't care. I don't need you to be friends. We do business. That's okay. If we don't, it's okay too, because I'll figure out an alternative avenue. But people shouldn't get jobs just because of their skin color, their sexual preference, their religious beliefs, or any other of these stupid criteria. I mean, look at Biden's White House. Look at that. He had transgender people with their breasts out on the White House lawn, flying the transgender flag from the top of the White House. I mean, that is insanity. I mean, this is how
you're saying DEI has been the culprit for the failure within the Biden administration.
Well, it's been one of them, but that's why I can guarantee you that's why Silicon Valley Bank went bust. And I've got a list of over 240 banks that are about to go bust for the similar reasons and their exposure to treasuries, and they've got rotten balance sheets. So the banking crisis for the smaller regional banks is far from over. And, that's what we were getting into a little earlier when we discussed that commercial real estate, residential real estate, and a lot of the bad loans that they have on credit card debt. Credit card debt should not be 30% or 28% or 25%.
Correct.
And these banks are borrowing from the Fed at almost zero. So,
boy, I remember just 4 years ago, I was borrowing money at something around 1.9 to 2.1%. And boy, that's ancient history now.
Well, it's killing consumers. But you see, that's why people don't realize that the stock market's in a state of delusion. And that's why, I would lighten up on stuff until it reprices. Now, they're going to obviously they're going to blame Trump. They're going to blame everything on him. So he's got to get ahead of it and realize.
When you say lighten up, what do you mean lighten up in the near term?
Big positions in equities. I would take profit before the end of this year.
Yeah, that's if you have positions in equities.
Right. I would lighten up.
If you're a bond guy and you've been living off interest, where do you go between now and?
Short dated bills are probably your best bet. 3-month bills, 6-month bills. I mean, right now, people need to be very defensive. You need return of your assets rather than on your assets, because there's going to be major dislocations. But with a dislocation, there's always I think that what we will see is we will see a generational opportunity to make generational wealth. Once in a generation, we're going to see that. And that's going to happen when the shakeout happens. And, it's coming. I just don't know when.
You say the shakeout. Is this global, include the EU and the rest of our Far Eastern folks, or is this going to be a shakeout just in the States within our central banking system?
Well, no, I think there's going to be a global depression. And I think, look, China's economy is on the brink, and they've got like billions of people that are going to come angry when that happens, when it implodes, because they've got the same debt issues that we have, to a larger extent, because there's more fraud there than there is here. But there's fraud in our system here. And until we can clear out the debt, we're going to have a problem. You just can't, or the dollar will go to zero, and inflation will. I mean, then people will be paying $500 for a bag of groceries. But
And
these
I
are
think that's what Donald Trump is referring to with the cryptocurrency concept, whether it's some morphed version of that worldwide from abroad, or whether it's something that the government creates. I don't mind the government creating a standard, but they have an obligation to step away and let the private forces of the marketplace control. That's where I think they're failing, because through their political insiders and alliances, through the PACs and everything else, they're finding allegiances with different political folks on one side and then the business folks on the other to protect themselves. And that's where I think the industry is failing.
well,
Uh,
also, Gene, I think that we could cut 50% of the government jobs. I think that's bloat.
oh,
I mean,
I totally agree.
please, 70.
Case in point was the recent 85,000 folks with the IRS they wanted to bring on. By the way, armed IRS agents.
Right.
And now, if you're going to bring on 80,000 people on ICE, the Biden administration wanted to use them to handle paper to document illegal aliens to get them to become citizens in the dark of the night.
Right.
Why don't you just push them back over the border and we do a deal with the countries to tell them to manage their own people?
Right. Exactly. But look, the problem is those jobs need to go. And we need to get government down to a reasonable size. It's unreasonable, unmanageable, and it's not productive. This is
Okay.
one of the biggest frauds on the planet that we've got going right now is the size of our government. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. They were hiring on average during the Biden administration, they were adding 40,000 jobs a month, I think it was when I last.
Yeah. So when they say they had an addition of jobs, it was government jobs that you and I were paying for. It wasn't jobs in the marketplace.
And they had foreign workers. The number of American workers stayed constant, and the number of foreign workers surged, and a lot of those were illegal aliens. So the quality of the jobs and the pay of the jobs was very low. So people were getting 2 and 3 jobs to just keep their heads above water, which is not a good economy. So I mean, Bidenomics gets an abject F rating, terrible, couldn't have been worse. And the media lied about it, and so did Biden, and so did Harris, and that's why they are now packing their U-Haul instead of
Mitch, I don't want to digress, but what price does media pay for this clear perpetration of a conspiracy and their complicity?
Well, none, because there were 6 when I started on Wall Street. There was 200 companies that own the media. Now there's 6, and these mega corporations don't care if they lose money. I mean, take for example people like Joy Reid. She's a race baiter, a liar, and the stuff she comes out with is horrible on MSNBC. I don't know who watches that stuff. I don't think anybody watches it. I think you get a couple people that watch this, a very, very, very small viewership, but these people become, this is where Trump derangement syndrome comes in. I mean, and they get mental health issues from watching this stuff. It's just so dishonest. It's so fundamentally dishonest. That's why I think there's going to be a paradigm shift in media. Stuff like what you're doing, podcasts, where people can hear reasonable people that are talking the truth.
But I'll take a show like this, which you and I have put together, and they've got their bots and their scrubbing mechanism to come in and see what's hot and not on this interview. And they're going to decide whether they're going to take me off LinkedIn or take me off Facebook or take me off YouTube based on something you may have said or I may have said. And all of a sudden, I'm banned. I'm in jail. I'm in Facebook jail for 2 weeks, 2 months for having had something you and I may have said. I think is the kind of stuff that needs to be a bold and courageous Congress needs to step up and
Right.
put the legislation in place to penalize those wrongdoers. That's what I was getting at in the beginning of our conversation an hour ago about penalties for wrongdoers. We've got enough damn rights on the books with our constitutional amendments to give people liberties, freedoms, and entitlements and accesses, but I don't see any penalties for wrongdoing.
Yeah, there isn't. I mean, even Twitter still throttles people. I mean, I'm throttled on Twitter. I mean, my
I'm
Twitter
glad you
account,
said that. I mean, here's Trump bringing in Elon Musk.
Elon, my account at Planet Ponzi is still throttled. And I know this because, we invested in a social media company. So I know exactly what they're doing. You have lack of reach. I have lack of reach on Twitter at Planet Ponzi if people want to follow it. But, somebody will retweet my stuff and they get maximum 15, 20, 30 times the amount from my tweet. But they put like a little line in above it. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, people must think that I'm like the stupidest or people are really, really dumb and they don't understand what's going on. Yeah, it's still everything is being censored with a filter and they put their thumb on the scale. We need to take those thumbs and break them. We also need a good rhino gun to go out and get those rhinos out there. Let's go rhino hunting. Yes, rhino hunting.
Hey, Elon, if you're listening, I appreciate what you're doing for Donald Trump. Talk to your folks a few levels down under you, shake them up, and stop throttling the people who want to follow me and want to follow Mitch here. He's got a great book out there, Planet Ponzi. It's not getting the exposure it deserves because someone's throttling back the followers. They're doing it to me. I have 1,200 followers one day. The next day, I'm down to 1,100 followers. How can that happen? It's happening, and I don't appreciate it. If you're gonna go in and work for Donald Trump, start with your own self-inventory within your own confines first. Fix Twitter to make sure it's not holding back rights and freedoms that you espouse. That's my message to you, Elon Musk, and I hope you're hearing it.
Right.
Mitch, closing comment, please.
Well, look, I hope that we get to make America great again. And I'm so overjoyed that President Trump was reelected. I was one of the only people that said everybody was telling me, oh, I'm cautiously optimistic. I said, get that out of your mouth because he's going to win by a landslide. He'll win the popular vote. He'll win it all. I was so bullish on this election. You wouldn't believe it. And nobody else was. I was. So, we got what we wanted. I got what I wanted. I'm really happy about it. Now, the rubber hits the road. He's got to surround himself with the right people, and hopefully he does. And we need the real change that the people voted for. We need to fulfill that mandate. That mandate.
Right behind me, Mitch, you can see a poster. It says Scott for leader of the Senate. Rick Scott's our United States Senator here in Florida, just reelected. I'm very proud of the man. I knew him a decade ago when I was county commissioner and he was governor. He turned out to be one of the most effective leaders in Florida, and it was a great handoff to Ron DeSantis, who everyone is also proud of. But in his role of United States Senator, there's 3 candidates running now, and I'll close with your final comments on this issue. Senator Scott has John Thune and John Comer from Texas, Senator Comer and Senator Thune. And both of them are patsies for Mitch McConnell, who's sailing off into the sunset, both of whom received an F grade in terms of their polling ranking, their grade on Liberty pollsters, Liberty Patriot, I think is the name of the poll. And now we're seeing from even X itself on Twitter massive number of people. There was a two-day poll out. Over 50,000 people polled. 90% of the polling went in favor of Senator Rick Scott. Less than 10% split between the other two. Why is Mitch McConnell and the secret ballot in the Senate pushing for the possibility of Thune or Comer when the nation, the popular vote, seeks Senator Rick Scott? Comment?
Yeah, that's simple. I mean, Mitch McConnell's a liar and he hates Donald Trump, right? Cornyn, Cornyn in Texas should be primaried. That guy hates Trump too. So Scott is the choice. That's what the people want. That's what the mandate should be. And we should get what we want. I mean, these games won't work. I mean, McConnell should be removed. I mean,
Yeah.
I think his dementia is getting as bad as Biden's.
Well, so's and I guess one thing I've noticed
His
consistent with the
payola
two of
from
them.
also his payola from China, that his wife, I think, is also involved with getting a little paycheck from
I'm glad you brought that up, but
custody with China.
it's a level of vitriol that exists both with Schumer, McConnell, and others that hated Donald Trump so badly, Biden in particular. And it's now been proven that the American citizen doesn't buy into that anymore. They
Right.
want Rick Scott. My only comment is let's do what we can. He's a good friend of ours and the media around us that we're aligned with. Mitch thinks the world of Senator Rick Scott as well. We need him in there to cooperate. He is the most transparent in what he has said. He
Let's
would
give
be,
Cornyn the big thumbs down.
yeah. He said, "Hey, it was Thune that had um, Dick Cheney at his house the day of the election going hunting. Senator Thune had Dick Cheney at his house on the day they were hunting. On the day of the election, they went hunting. It's obscene what I've seen. The nation needs to know it. The popular vote out there has already given its opinion. Let's get Senator Rick Scott in. This is my last pitch. Today is Monday, the 11th. I think tomorrow, the 12th, the Senate's supposed to be having a ballot tomorrow on this thing. It's supposed to be a private ballot. I'm not in favor of a private ballot. I think it's going to leak out and show what the results are anyway. So the Republican senators that choose the party leader in the Senate best be advised that, like what Mitch Firestein just said, they may be primaried if they're not careful about this vote. Their actions will speak louder than their words. Mitch, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Rick Scott, thumbs up, the other two thumbs down, and come on, this is our mandate. Let's get it going, guys. Get it together or get primaried out and leave the party. Join the Democratic Party. Or join, what's her name? I keep forgetting. Uh uh sorry.
Kamala Harris?
No, I've got a mental block. Her daddy was VP.
Liz Cheney.
Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney. Liz
Yeah.
Cheney. I can't even think of that woman anymore, but think about the destruction that she's done and the mayhem she tried to sow. And her election was the poster child for what happens when you don't listen to the people of America.
Yeah, well, that is what happens when you don't listen to the people of America. And think about how many people fall into that same basket, Mitch. You've got Liz Cheney, her father. You've got Pelosi, Maxine Waters, Jerry Nadler, Adam Schiff, Eric Swalwell.
Yeah.
I could name a bunch more that have done nothing but hurt this nation. Hakeem Jeffries, the AOC crowd. Uh, we need an enema in government, and it's never been in a better position than now to do so. And we got to start by making sure the leadership around Donald's biggest problem, if there's anything to criticize, is that he trusted so many people 4 years ago.
Right.
And he had a circle around him that came to him by advisors from around him that failed him in that sense because that circle around him was not a loyal group of people. I'm a big advocate of loyalty. Yeah, we can have our differences, but that's different from the notion of loyalty. And the loyalty that Donald Trump needs around him must start with the Senate Majority Leader, Rick Scott, on the Senate side. On the House of Representatives side, Mike Johnson's doing a good job, a little overwhelmed with a lot of craziness over there in the House. But God willing, it looks like he's going to survive any transformation of the control. I think the Republicans will hold control of the House. At least it's pretty evident now. So, assuming he gets reappointed, reelected to his House Speaker role in the future as well, I think Donald Trump will be surrounded by two key characters: Senator Rick Scott on the Senate, Mike Johnson on the House. Watch them. If you thought Donald Trump was able to get things done 4 years ago, and he did, he did it with a ball and chain he had to carry, and he still sprinted and won the race. Nonetheless, now with good allies around him he can trust, I submit, Mitch, the economic fear of a disaster that you mentioned earlier may not come to pass. I hope you're wrong on that point, but I'm very aware that your forecasts in the past have proven correct. So it bothers me that you're correct, but I'm so grateful, Mitch, that I've had the privilege of having you on our show today, the Grassroots Truthcast. Any closing comment?
Rhino's got to go, and I hope I'm wrong too, Gene, but I don't think I am, unfortunately.
Well, I should have thrown them in the same basket. Yeah, you're correct.
Thank you for
joining me today, Mitch Firestein. Worked a member of Parliament under Nigel Farage. We'll come back and talk more about foreign economy, UK, and the Far East in the future, hopefully on another episode. And also a trader, I call him a trader, more of a financial expert on Wall Street with institutional investing, Mitch Firestein. And a friend of mine I've had the privilege of meeting with and through the Newsmax team in downtown New York. Mitch, thanks for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
And to you too. And to all of you watching, thank you for joining us on another episode of Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. Spread the word. Please subscribe on genevalentino.com and share these episodes with as many folks as you can. It helps us grow our numbers as the social media tries to quash our numbers. We need your help getting the word out. Spread it as much as possible to friends and family. Thanks for joining us.
Gene Valentino's Grassroots podcast. He tells the truth. He tries to get information out there to make sure people make good, informed decisions.
Thanks for joining us for Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, and God bless America.